Hey, this is Kevin with Consumer Reports, and today I'm reviewing a CMC Trigger. It's part number 91501, and it's advertised as having a 3.5 pound trigger pull, which you can kind of see here on the package. So my goal here is that, this is a AR that I built, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I just put in one of the standard build kits in here, and it's clearly it's unloaded, but typically if I go and I measure several of these that I've built in the past, my trigger pull typically comes in anywhere between about 5.5 and 6.5 pounds, and you can kind of see here that one pulled in at about 7. Let me do it again. And focus a little bit better on placement. Alright, and more of a steady pull. So that one was about 6 pounds right there, and I'll just do it one more time. And again, there was nothing special about this trigger. It was just a standard in the lower assembly kit that I picked up. Probably, my guess is that was about 6 pounds. Okay, so I probably picked it up at Brownells or Palmetto State or some other place like that. I'm not 100% sure, but I mean that's typically the range of pull weight that I've gotten out of those cheap, inexpensive build kits. So for this particular rifle, I wanted to put together something that this is chambered in 300 blackout, and I wanted to put together something that I could use for deer hunting and more of a closer quarters, kind of a tight stand that might be down in a swamp or something like that I really didn't need any real optical magnification, and just something kind of short and simple was what I was going for. But the trigger pull is not something that I would brag about at all. Hence, I picked this up at Palmetto State. It was $99, and I'm going to go through and look at a little bit more of the details of this trigger, and then I'm going to drop it in. Okay, I took the trigger assembly out of the packaging, which you can see here, and overall I would say it's relatively a pretty simple configuration. It's a one-piece drop-in. All of the trigger hammer springs and whatnot are already in place. It's got a set of larger pins that those all ride on right there, and it's just a pretty simple assembly. As you can see there, one thing that I did note in looking at it is that they liberally greased it. I don't know if you can see in there. They liberally greased it throughout, which is good on the hammer area. It also came with some, you can call them anti-walk pins, but in reality they have to send a set of pins similar to this, because inside here there's not a little bar that can rest on a detent, so standard pins wouldn't work anyway in this particular configuration, so they have to send another set of pins. Okay, to remove your old trigger and hammer, you've got your two pins right here, hammer pin, trigger pin right there, and I'm going to use a punch, and I'm going to go ahead and basically knock it through the first detent, both of them. Alright, just like that. And for the hammer pin, typically I like to rotate it around and then push it kind of seated in this direction right here, in that direction right there. And I'm going to go ahead, and this punch is a little bit smaller in diameter than the pin. I'll push that pin all the way out like you can see here. I'm going to set it aside. I'm going to move the punch out. And I'm going to let that rotate up like that, and then it'll come out, and there's the spring assembly right there. Now I'm going to do the same as far as pushing the punch out on the trigger pin right here. You can see it's already started out on this side. It's not quite as tricky in my mind as the other one. So I've pushed it all the way through. It dropped out there. Now I'm going to take this out of the assembly. Here is a disconnector. Move that and get the trigger out. Small spring still in place. And so you can see I've got the old trigger components removed, and I've also left in the safety, and it's actually in the fire position right here. Alright, so I went and I took the trigger assembly, and I essentially pushed the hammer back all the way back until it basically is retained. And then what you're going to notice is, without removing the safety, there's actually no way to get the assembly to drop into place. There's just not enough room to rotate it around for the trigger and to get it up under the safety. So you'll need to go through and also remove the grip off of the lower receiver and then pull the safety itself. Alright, to remove the grip, and this depends on the type of grip that you actually have. This particular grip is a Magpul version, so I had to take the bottom cap off, and I've already loosened the bolt that you can see down through there. I could take it either an Allen wrench or a standard slotted screwdriver, and so I just used a standard slot. And so I've lifted the grip off. Now I do want to point out that when you do that, what you're going to see is here's a spring that fell out, and also there's a very small brass detent that's inside that hole right there. Alright, so it may fall out if I turn it this way. If not, maybe some lubricant's holding it in place. Now, in this case, I've got an ambidextrous safety here, which you may or may not have that. If I didn't have that, then it would slide right out. So I'll have to get a Allen wrench to remove this side of the safety, and then I'll drop that out. So now I've got the safety removed, and I'm going to take the trigger assembly, just like you see here, and just drop it in place, just like that. And you can see it dropped in, and actually you can see the holes are nearly lined up right there. From there, I'm going to slide in their trigger pins that they provided with the assembly, and that just slides right in. There's the back one. Put the front one in. It slides right in. So essentially, you can see that they are both in place. And now I'm going to go through the process of installing the small screws that they provided, one for each side of the pins. Right, I will say I tried just putting the screws into the pins while it was in the receiver, and it just took a minute to get the threads lined up just right on these. So I went ahead and pulled this rear pin out, and I'll put it back in, but I think I'm going to go ahead and start with one of the screws already in at a time. And I had to go through and actually turn the thread in the wrong direction until you can feel that thread actually start. There we go. Whoop. There it is. So that one started. So just be careful. Don't force these threads, because I mean once if they're lined up correctly, they should screw in easily just by your hands. You shouldn't require the small Torx keys that they provided with it. You shouldn't need those to start these. Once I got the screws started on each side, I used the two wrenches that they sent with it, with the Torx tips on them, to tighten them both up, and I snugged them down. And there's actually there's a little bit of free play. Oh, you can't tell. I'm sure you can't tell in the video, but there's just a little bit of free play in there. But it's going to hold the assembly in place very secure. Alright, so now I can actually go through and do a pull on this to see what the trigger pull weight's going to be. So it should be, I haven't installed the safety yet, which is, it's not an issue, but get that located about where my fingertips would be on the trigger. There we go. Alright, and so I'll actually shift it just a little bit, go about right there. Alright. So that was about 4 pounds. Let me make sure I got this about where my finger's going to be. Just be more all right there. Alright, reset that. So that was about 3.6 pounds. Reset it. That was about 3 3/4 pounds. So it says 3.5 pounds. In my scenario, I'm getting 3.9, somewhere between, we'll say 3.5 and 4 pounds is what I ended up getting on this. So that's not too bad. It's clearly lots better than what I had before. Alright, to compare the two triggers now that they're actually installed on a lower, this is the original, or an original. It's very similar. It's just a cheap, cheap lower kit, and it was the components inside that. And so let me move this out of the way. And so one thing I want to say is that the trigger here is firm. It's not wobbly at all. Okay, as I pull the trigger here, I don't know if you can tell, you can actually see the hammer starting to slowly come back, and this is about a 6.5 pound trigger pull here. Alright, I think you can see it a little bit right there. You can see the hammer coming back maybe. Alright. Now, with the CMC drop-in trigger, I don't know if you can hear that, but I mean the trigger's loose. It's loose in the assembly. That'll kind of bug me. I'll just be honest with you. That'll kind of bug me a little bit. I may try to see if there's a way that I can shim that up to make that not happen. And to me, it looks like the issue is really the fit of the, we'll say, the stainless steel housing around the trigger assembly and the inside of the actual receiver itself. So I'm sure that I will probably put some type of, I don't know, maybe aluminum tape in there to kind of shim it out a little bit, just to get rid of that jiggle, because that jiggle like that, just again, it's kind of a me thing, kind of drives me nuts. And I'll give you an example. This lower receiver right here, the buffer tube, I've actually put black tape on this so that if I'm sitting in a deer stand and for some reason shoulder the rifle, that, except for that click right there, I don't end up with a little clanking that would occur if the buttstock right here was actually loose on the buffer tube. So again, I'm not sure if all drop-in triggers have the same situation, but this particular one does. As far as the trigger pull itself goes, you know, it really, as I pull the trigger, so let me see if I can get it going, I don't really see any perceivable moving down of the hammer, meaning that the angle that those two components are at is actually causing the hammer to be cocked more. It's more of the trigger sliding off of the surface in there to release it. And so I've got just a very small amount of movement of the trigger before it fires. I measured it several more times, and this, I would probably say, if I were to average them all, it came in at about 3 3/4 pound trigger pull on this, which is much better than the, we'll say, 6-ish, a little over 6-ish that I measured earlier. After I assembled the whole rifle, I went through and, you know, shouldered it and was just checking it out. And as I put my finger on the trigger, man, that looseness was just driving me nuts. So I went ahead and started using some of this aluminum tape here, and I cut a couple of plies kind of shaped like this to go around the trigger pins, essentially on each side. Kind of give you an example. I'm not going to pull it back out because after I pushed it in, the aluminum kind of got all crinkly and rolled up a little bit, but I put 2 layers on each side and then slid the trigger assembly back in there, and right now you can tell that it's firm. There's actually no jiggle to it. This is exactly what I would have wanted or expected. I measured the trigger pull on it. It's not bound or anything, so it still had about that 3 3/4 pound trigger pull. And so for me, at this point, I can say this installation is going to be complete. And I'll use this assembly. I've got another upper assembly that I'm going to review here in the near future. And I'll use this assembly, this lower, to do my range testing on that. But again, it's 3 3/4 pounds. It's the CMC Trigger assembly. Now this is their original. I even say it, the original, since 2003. And so I guess this gives me a good baseline of what an original is. So as I look at some of the other drop-in triggers in the future, maybe I'll have I'll see a growth in the technology. You know, also I will say that, you know, there's a certain amount of tolerances that manufacturers have to account for. You know, and so just the width of this machine slot right here, there's probably some small variation in that, and because of that, the CMC has got to ensure their drop-in will drop in any of those. So potentially this Spikes Tactical might be machined to a little bit on the wider side, but within tolerances, and then their assembly maybe is on the lower side, but within tolerances, and the two of those just stack up to that. They were able to stack up to cause that rattle. Anyway, it's all good now. So that's it. Thank you.